To start with, we need to understand why we age in the first place. Aside from the existential dread it may cause, aging is a complex process whereby there is a progressive loss of the body's ability to maintain itself. Your body runs on finely tuned chemical machinery, proteins, and the cell's instruction manual, DNA. Like all machinery, proteins break, malfunction, and accumulate errors over time. Highly reactive chemicals called free radicals are produced by metabolism and through exposure to the environment, such as UV rays. They can damage proteins and DNA. To prevent this, cells constantly maintain order and cleanliness. The cell's maintenance mechanisms repair damaged DNA, discard old proteins, and signal the cell to make new proteins. Eventually, the cell becomes too damaged and cannot work anymore. The body makes more cells to replace these old ones. However, cells have an internal limit, defined by their DNA, on how many times they can divide, meaning that we can't keep creating new cells forever. Over time, with fewer new cells to replace old ones, and with the damage piling up, it becomes difficult to maintain our youth. This is part of what leads to the physical manifestations of old age, as well as some common diseases, such as cancer and diabetes. So, logically, if we could have more young cells and maintain our existing cells better, we wouldn't get as sick and broken down when we're older.
With the concept of moral objectivism, what we're looking at is the idea that there can be some universal moral principles, some rules, some ideas, and guidelines that are valid for all people in all social environments and all situations. The idea that we can essentially have some signposts or a roadmap to guide behavior is going to be consistent across all individuals. Now, if we take a look at this in another perspective, we can come up with a view of moral absolutism. In the area of moral absolutism, basically, what we have is illustrated on the right-hand side of this slide is a very firm and unyielding boundary between what is right and what is wrong. And so, within moral absolutism, basically what you have are these non-overridable principles. They must be followed. They must never be violated, and there were no exceptions. It is always right, it is always wrong, and nothing is subject to interpretation, and nothing is dependent upon the situation.
White has become the standard color for airplanes' exteriors. While stylish, it's also a calculated decision by many airlines. White essentially reflects sunlight instead of absorbing it like other colors do. This is great for keeping the plane's interior temperature down. It's the same as getting into a white car on a sunny day. Its inside is probably cooler than a black car's would be. And since constant exposure to sunlight often causes many colors to fade anyway thanks to oxidation, white becomes a practical choice. White is easy to spot, whether in the air, on the ground, or in the case of a crash, in the sea. And it's easy to see cracks or chips in the paint when that paint is white. This detection is important because dirt and moisture can quickly collect in these chips, becoming sites of corrosion that could eat away at the aircraft's body. This is one reason, in fact, that planes are usually painted at all instead of being left as polished metal. Painted metal more readily resists corrosion than unpainted metal. You'll often see plastic, fiberglass, or carbon fiber painted white on planes, too. This is because these parts of the plane are easily susceptible to sun damage, which the white paint helps prevent. So, why aren't all planes pure white? Advertising. After a white base, airlines will often paint their brand name on the side and their colors on the tail of the plane.
So, continuing our series of lectures on modernism, we now turn to architecture, and in particular to the work of Frank O. Gehry. Now, I'm not going to go into his career in detail. It is enough to say that early on, he was, like other modernist architects, tied to the rectangle, the straight line, and so on. Often their buildings would have this basic shape, and they would just add bits of decoration like splashes of color or pointless balconies. Soon enough, Gehry wanted to break away from straight lines and grid-like designs. He wanted the freedom to experiment with other shapes, curves, and unusually angled roofs. What helped him with this was the computer, which allowed him to visualize and experiment with complex shapes and to work on the whole design as one piece, without the added decoration being thrown in as an afterthought. Architecture as art, if you like. Or sculpture even. He himself said that he had struggled with crossing the line between architecture and sculpture. Now, I want to talk about one building in particular, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, which I think you'll agree is a masterpiece.
During the time of the Aztecs, cocoa was mainly used as a beverage. Wines and drinks were made from white pulp around the seeds of the cocoa pod. The beans themselves were used to make hot or cold chocolate drinks. Both the Maya and the Aztec secular drinks used roasted cocoa beans, a foaming agent sugar, toasted corn, and water. Vanilla and/or chili were also used as an ingredient in the drinks. Cocoa beans were also used as a currency and as a tribute tax from peoples ruled by Aztecs. The oily later floating in the chocolate drink cocoa butter was used to protect skin against the sun. For the Aztecs, cocoa had a religious significance. Cocoa was believed to be of divine origin. The cocoa tree in heaven. Human sacrifices to appreciate God or Sun were first sanctified by giving him chocolate. Cocoa beans were given to priest assistants at children's coming-of-age ceremonies. During marriage ceremonies, the couples drank a symbolic cup of chocolate and exchanged cocoa beans. They believed that drinking chocolate gave mortals some of Quetzalcoatl wisdom, god of learning and the wind.
Studying law at university over 3 years gives you a really unique opportunity to acquire a much greater and much more mature level of understanding and knowledge of the law, which can be of real benefit to your career in the future. If you're not so sure if you want to study law, law can also be an incredibly helpful degree for a multitude of other careers. For example, politics, journalism, the charity sector, the United Nations. It can be a springboard to all these different types of careers. Why is this? Well, because of the way that we teach law. A law degree involves not only studying what the legal rules are, but really taking an analytical approach to the world around us. It involves thinking about why certain laws exist. Can they be justified philosophically? How have they developed historically? What social goals are they trying to serve? And how should the law develop in the future? So here at Cambridge, we're not just studying what the law is. We're talking about what the law could be, what the law should be.
Market economies work on the assumption that market forces, such as supply and demand, are the best determinants of what's right for a nation's well-being. These economies rarely engage in government interventions, such as price fixing, licence quotas, and industry subsidisations. While most developed nations today could be classified as having mixed economies, they are often said to have market economies because they allow market forces to drive most of their activities, typically engaging in government intervention only to the extent that is needed to provide stability. Although the market economy is clearly the system of choice in today's global marketplace, there is significant debate regarding the amount of government intervention considered optimal for efficient economic operations. An economy in which the greater part of production, distribution and exchange is controlled by individuals and privately owned corporations rather than by the government, and in which government interference in the market is minimal. Although a total market economy is probably only theoretically possible because it would exclude taxation and regulation of any kind, capitalist economies approximate it and socialist economies are antithetical to it. Market economies are also called free economies, free markets, or free enterprise systems.
But we can really thank the Great Exhibition of 1851 for giving us the world's premier taxi service. For it was going to this exhibition, this fabulous exhibition of inventions from all around the four corners of the empire, that the visitors were appalled, dismayed and vexed by their journeys to this exhibition, because the cabbies of the day in their horse-drawn carts were absolutely terrible, could not find their way to this exhibition. And so, at great public outcry, the London authorities set up the Public Carriage Office, which is a organisation that still exists. You can take a short walk to Penton Street up the road. And this Public Carriage Office took on the responsibility of licensing all major taxi drivers in London. All taxi drivers from 1851 onwards had to pass what is now known as the London Knowledge, this phenomenal knowledge of London. What is the London Knowledge? It's the ability to remember the 25,000 streets, how they're all interconnected, and know all the main arterial roads in and out of London. Cabbies need to know all this, plus 1,000 points of specific interest, cafes, bars, public offices. They need to know them all as part of their training.
At the top, you would have a king. Now, the king would rule over a kingdom. Now, this is not so easy to govern, especially during the Middle Ages, and the king might owe many people things, especially people who helped the king come to power, helped him depose the previous king or to conquer this land. And so, in exchange for that, and to help govern, he might grant land or fiefs to other people. And the key currency in the Middle Ages, under the feudal system, is land, and land in exchange for loyalty and service. So this whole thing is a kingdom. Now right over here, this is a duchy. And a duchy will be controlled by a duke. I guess they didn't call it duchy because that just doesn't sound as serious. So the king might grant a duchy to a duke, and in exchange, the duke would provide loyalty, pledge their fealty. If the kingdom is threatened, the duke will fight alongside the king, would provide their own troops. If the king wants to go conquer other territories, same thing. And also provide the king with taxes, which might be in the form of coinage, depending on what time and region we are in the Middle Ages, or it might be in the form of a percentage of the agricultural production from this duchy.
The Earth's temperature is rising, and as it does, springtime phenomena, like the first bloom of flowers, are getting earlier and earlier. But rising temperatures aren't the only factor. Urban light pollution is also quickening the coming of spring.
So temperature and light are really contributing to a double whammy of making everything earlier.
Richard French Constant, an entomologist at the University of Exeter. He and his colleagues compiled 13 years of data from citizen scientists in the UK who tracked the first bud burst of 4 common trees. And it turns out light pollution from streetlights in cities and along roads pushed bud burst a full week earlier, way beyond what rising temperatures could achieve. This disruptive timing can ripple through the ecosystem.
The caterpillars that feed on trees are trying to match the hatching of their eggs to the timing of bud burst, because the caterpillars want to feed on the juiciest and least chemically protected leaves. And it's not just the caterpillars, of course, that are important, but the knock-on effect is on nesting birds, which are also trying to hatch their chicks at the same time that there's the maximum number of caterpillars.
So earlier buds could ultimately affect the survival of birds and beyond. The findings are in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B. The world's becoming increasingly urbanized, and light pollution is growing, which French Constant says could trick trees into budding earlier and earlier. But smarter lighting, like LEDs that dial down certain wavelengths, could help.
Perhaps the exciting thing is that if we understand more about how light affects this bud burst, that we might be able to devise smarter sort of street lighting that has less red components and therefore less early bud burst.
Thus keeping springtime an actual springtime phenomenon.